Hi, everyone. This is Josh Hoffman from Future of Jewish, and I am pleased to be joined right now by Rachel Moore. Rachel and I have a pretty decent past together. We met when we both moved to Israel. Rachel will tell you more about how she got to Israel. We've worked more on the professional side of things. I don't know if I would say we're friends necessarily, but we definitely have some professional working background together. We've had some conversations that I think are very important for more people to know, which is why I invited her on to do this sort of webinar with us. She's a settler. She openly says she's a settler. She lives in the so-called Israeli settlements, and I think it's important to put a face to the name of the Israeli settlements. I, on Future of Jewish, have many times said that I do, on one hand, think that the settlements are provocative. And I've also said that not all settlements are created equal, so we can't batch them into just one group of settlements. There's settlements that are more provocative, less provocative. There are settlements that are completely legal, some that maybe are open to interpretation. And I actually want to learn more as well from Rachel. So without further ado, Rachel Moore, coming to us from the Israeli settlements. Why don't you start by going to the very beginning of where you were born and raised, and ultimately how you got to being a settler?
Okay. First of all, thank you, Josh, for the opportunity to have the conversation. I think the most appropriate word would be colleagues, right? We are friends through professional avenues and therefore colleagues, I think would be the best term. I grew up in New England is the short answer, but my formative years in a small town in Weston, Connecticut, which at the time had a population of 5,000, almost none of whom were Jews. We didn't have public transportation. We didn't have sidewalks. We didn't have a proper police department. We had a lot of woods and nature. And I went to public school. I lived in a place where being a Republican or a conservative was considered a bad word. And people moved there to avoid any notion of having to deal with crime. It was not anything in our lives. The idea of locking your door was laughable. So in many, many ways, it was very different from Israel. My parents moved to Boston when I was 16, and they grew up in Boston. And that's why I say New England. I first came to Israel in my senior year of high school because my parents moved when I was 16. And that was such a challenging time for me to move that I decided to deal with it by going away and coming to Israel. And that was really when I first fell in love with Israel. So even though I grew up in a place that really didn't have many Jews at all, and certainly didn't have any religious Jews, I had never seen an Orthodox Jew until I was a teenager at all. I grew up with a very strong Jewish identity. So one thing that I learned very much was that our synagogue community became like an extended family. And I think that's relevant because we've chosen to live in a very small settlement that really acts like a community. I did not have that in my small town by any means. People did not really want to look over their fences and mess with anybody else's business. But I did have that in my synagogue community, and I think it was stronger because everybody did not live amongst other Jews. The other thing that I grew up with there, though, was a very strong sense that in a healthy democracy that took freedom of religion seriously, that you could live a diversity without ever having any notion that your religion or your ethnicity would be in the majority, and you could still feel like you could have a full life of freedom and prosperity. And good things. And it is definitely relevant to my outlook today. I think it is more important for people in the Middle East to have the ability to flourish, to have democracy and freedom and full rights, than it is to have a leader that looks like them and sounds like them and prays like them. And that is definitely something that's ingrained from the way I grew up. To sort of fast forward, parents moved at 16. I came to Israel at 17. I said, I'm not going to go to college right away. I was enrolled in a small liberal arts college that was Episcopalian, I think. And I said, I'm not going to go. I'm going to do a gap year. If you weren't religious, gap years were not a thing back in the old days when I was a kid. And my parents fought me tooth and nail. They absolutely did not want me to come to Israel for the year. I told them I was going to do it anyway. And that was the year of the Gulf War. So, to what it was, but can you just give me a bit of advice? So I came to Israel for the year on a 2-month program in high school, decided I was going to come back for the year. I came here for the year on a program called Neve. It was not Orthodox. It was through the conservative movement. We actually ironically were in Kibbutz Sad, which is one of the places that's now been evacuated. But in the Gulf War, that was actually one of the safest places to be. I was quite sure about halfway through that year that I wanted to make Israel my home one day. And it was just a question of how. Again, my parents weren't so thrilled. But I think that the war for me was a little test because it wasn't easy to be here. And I felt like, well, if I still want to be here now when people are running to shelters and there's sirens, then I know that it's real and I want to be here. It's like when people know they're in love when they have their first fight, or they see the worst side of someone. And it is definitely something that I keep with me now, as I'm going through the tests of all of our resilience, with everything that's going on now. But I think that was very impactful in terms of that being part of my year. I wanted to stay. My parents said no. I went to McGill University instead of that small private college, really large university in Montreal, had tremendous Zionist Jewish community and a tremendous population that hated Israel. So a lot of what we're seeing today on campus, we definitely experienced and had the precursor then. But my entire university experience was focused on getting back to Israel. And actually, you're correct, but the time that you knew that I had come to Israel was the second time I had come here. So I moved here in 1995. I lived in Jerusalem. And at the time, I was interviewed for television in support of the West Bank around the time of the Oslo Accords being signed. And the interviewer said, you seem such a supporter of the West Bank. Are you going to move there? And I said at the time, completely on the spot, at all of 22 years old, I'm moving to Jerusalem because that's the best decision for me now in terms of my life and where, single life and community. But when the time comes, I will consider the best place for me to live in all of Israel, and that includes the West Bank. And, I had that conviction then, and it hasn't changed. I lived in Jerusalem for 6 years. I then lived in New Jersey for 12. Our family went there for personal family reasons. And when we moved back, we moved directly to Neve Daniel. And we were absolutely specifically looking for options that would work for our family within the West Bank, meaning it was a quality of life decision that was also ideological.
Thank you so much for all that background, Rachel. So talk about a little bit more of the ideological reasons, and in that vein, why don't you also tell us what you think it means to be a settler?
Okay, so first of all, I work in the world of language. I own a public relations firm and messaging, and I think that settler has all kinds of connotations, and I don't identify with them. For me, being a settler means I live in a settlement, and other people define a settlement as a community that's within the West Bank. I don't have a problem using the term West Bank, and I have a problem using the term settler, but I don't live my life defined by that. And I think it's just rather arbitrary. It doesn't define much of anything. I do live here for ideological reasons, but I have a lot of neighbors who don't. It isn't necessarily indicative of everybody who's here. There are people here because their family lives here, because of the school system, which were also reasons that we came, proximity to Jerusalem. But it isn't necessarily that being a settler means that people made an ideological choice. For us, we did. So I'll start with that and what it means. What it means for me is I live in a settlement, period. That's what it means, beginning and end. I share the view with my husband that the settlements are part of the West Bank, and the West Bank is disputed territory. It is not occupied. We are not an ongoing administrative presence or the government in the West Bank, the Palestinian West Bank, as evidenced by the fact that we don't make rules. Our traffic laws are not enforced, even though they share our roads. We are not responsible for their infrastructure. They have their own police. They have their own government. They pay taxes to somebody else. That's not occupation. That we are not involved in the running of their day-to-day lives. We live in a portion of land that was seized from Jordan in a war that Israel didn't start in 1967, and that Israel seized with the desperate hope that the Jordanians would take it back in exchange for peace. And Jordan said, we don't want it. No backsies. No way. We are not interested in that problem. In the same way, by the way, that the King of Jordan has now said, we will not take a single refugee, not a one, in a press conference. Black and white, we don't want this problem. You can have it. I wasn't in the room and I wasn't making the decision, but for whatever reason at that time, Israel did not make a decision to annex it and claim it as territory and make it sovereign Israel, nor did it abdicate any responsibility. It maintained a presence, hence becoming a disputed territory. Because that disputed territory includes Jewish residents, there is obviously a military presence to protect those citizens. And that somehow got translated into an occupation, which is not reflective of international law or of the reality on the ground. And with all of that said, and within the context of being disputed territory, whatever negotiations happen in the long run, having Jews where we are is strategically valuable and important to Israel. It has created jobs and infrastructure for everybody else that lives here. And I've been saying for years, we are a buffer that creates greater security for Jerusalem. Today, this morning, the gate to my yeshuv was locked and I could not leave because a car full of terrorists were checked at a checkpoint and they shot soldiers and they killed somebody and they injured 5 more at the tunnels of the checkpoint where I live. They were leaving Hebron and they were on their way to Jerusalem to carry out a much larger scale attack against Jerusalem citizens, which means the theoretical that we are a buffer that protects Jerusalem was unfortunately proven out today. A Jewish presence in this part of the West Bank saved lives in Jerusalem, protected Jerusalem. It's not theoretical. Jews live in less than 12% geographically of the West Bank. We are not knocking on people's doors and kicking them out of their homes. We are not bulldozing people and saying, you get out, we're taking over now. Neve Daniel, my settlement, was built in a place not only that was deeded to Jews before the state of Israel, but didn't have anybody living here. The perimeter of the Yishuv is defined by land that is claimed or even disputed to be claimed by other people. And opposite my house, there's this one lonely hill that nobody builds anything on because they think that it might be pending, that maybe somebody has a claim, so nobody will touch it. That is not occupying someone's land. That's not taking anybody over. That's taking empty land and choosing to make a presence that is Jewish. I don't ideologically believe that there should be the ethnic cleansing of any area anywhere in the world where you can just say Jews can't live here. The notion that because the West Bank is not property of Israel means it's okay to say that no Jews should live there is morally problematic to me on an international scale. People say, what's going to happen with Gaza? Whatever happens, who gets to decide that disengagement means no Jews live in a territory? I'm not sure when we decided that the moral bar for any human being is that ethnic cleansing is okay. So the world, Israel and its neighbors have to figure out the final status of the place where I live. And in the short term, we are being relevant. We are making a statement. We are securing Jerusalem. We are helping create greater infrastructure for Israel and for Israelis, and quite frankly, for the Palestinians who live around us. And I know you want to talk about that reality, our interaction with them more. And I think we'll get to that. But our being here is not a provocation to anyone. It's a net positive. It has people getting to know each other. It has increased jobs and opportunity and understanding for the people who are seeking that. For people who are looking for any excuse to blame the Jews and hate the Jews and look down on the Jews, sure, absolutely. Call me bad names and I'll be your source. The minute I made a choice in my life to live as a religious Jew and to live in the West Bank, I immediately made an active decision to stop caring if I have the world's approval. So that to me is not relevant in the grand scheme of things. But one of the things that attracted most of us who moved here is this notion that we matter. And I think that spirit, that every person counts and makes a difference is lost in the United States. Many people live in a state where they know if they vote, it's not going to make any difference, right? My state's a red state, my state's a blue state, it doesn't matter. Here, I think that people feel that they matter. And we felt like, our geography makes a difference. It makes a statement.
Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. I want to ask you a few follow-up questions to some of the things you just said. The first one is sort of the Israeli military presence in the West Bank, the checkpoints that you mentioned. Um, can you just give us a feel from your vantage point of what you see on a day-to-day basis? Not just right now in terms of the situation of having a war going on, but in sort of the normal day-to-day basis from your eyes, how you see the Israeli military presence in the West Bank, the checkpoints and so forth, your interactions, how you see other people, whether it be Jews or Palestinians, interacting with them. Can you just give us a little bit more concrete picture and holistic picture of the Israeli military presence, including the checkpoints in your day-to-day life?
So in my day-to-day life, I don't really feel or see the military presence a whole heck of a lot. They have like stations where they're guarding at the entrances of public areas, like a shopping area, or if you go from one yeshuv to another, then you'll pass, a gate where somebody is vetting the cars and wants to make sure that you're meant to be there. My mother-in-law lives in a gated community in New Jersey, and there's somebody sitting in a security box that's very similar, making sure that it's okay to go in. I'm very grateful to the soldiers. We try to let them know that we're grateful. And at the same time, as a mom of, a lot of kids, many of whom are teenagers or were there, for an 18-year-old kid to be having to do this at all makes me feel very bad. I think there are a small number of people who've ruined it for everyone. That when Neve Daniel was created, there was no checkpoint. Before the second Intifada, you drove from Jerusalem to here and there was no checkpoint. Israel didn't create the checkpoint because we've decided we're going to let Jews live in, it didn't happen in 67, like we're going to let Jews live here and now we're going to create this military presence at all. Suicide bombers got through and blew people up in Jerusalem and forced, in the same way, like one guy had a thing in his shoe and we all suffer TSA in every airport, right? All across the United States because somebody decided to ruin it for everyone. Unfortunately, the checkpoint was created to save lives, not because Israel's decision to let Jews simply live somewhere meant by definition creating a military presence. So I'll tell you what I do see. There are people from Bethlehem who come, when the war notwithstanding, come into my yeshuv, shop in my grocery store, feel free to be here, set up a car wash outside of Bethlehem and interact with us freely. There's a huge red sign in front of Bethlehem that says, if I want to go there, I'm risking my life, right? No one's barring them from coming here. I was driving once into Neve Daniel, into our settlement, and I was pregnant, and a taxi driver, like a big yellow taxi van, smashed into the side of my car. It wasn't a ramming attack at all. He just didn't look. He was like making a U-turn and didn't look out of the left. And it was just incompetence, but he really hit my car. And unlike in other places in Israel, when the police came, they came with the military. And that was very interesting to me. So that is like one way in which I saw the interaction. And the rest of that story is the taxi driver was from Hebron. He was Palestinian, not an Israeli citizen. The police and the army could do absolutely nothing. They didn't give him a ticket. There was nothing they could file. Our insurance company also laughed at us. Like, there is nobody for us to hold accountable here. And that was really telling to me, because here I'm being told that I'm creating a double standard. I have this apartheid, right? And like, I have to follow the traffic laws. If I hit somebody, nobody asks me if I hit a Jew or an Arab. I have to pay the damages. Like, I'm held responsible for my actions. And these are people sharing the roads with me. So it definitely does not feel equal, but it doesn't feel like I'm the one who's doing that to anybody else. And at the same time, for the person who hit the car, like, he was scared. The minute that becomes like a military incident as opposed to just the police, it is different. It is, you know, we do feel that difference. But I don't see like soldiers patrolling and like managing the lives of anybody out here. That's not something that I see.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you also about sort of the bad apples, a few bad apples that exist everywhere in the world in every situation. There have been some incidents that at least have been reported. I don't know if anyone can confirm them personally. I can't confirm them. People around the world certainly can't confirm them, but there have been some incidents reported in the news during the war that certain settlers, so to speak, are going around and intimidating Palestinians in the West Bank, otherwise known as Judea and Samaria. There have reportedly been settlers that have shot, I guess, Palestinians in your area. Um, Again, the way I see it, and I think you would agree, is that these are just a few bad apples among a huge population that is 99% of which very peaceful and very not interested in those kind of activities. But I'm just curious, when you do see some of these bad apples doing things that I described and other things in the West Bank, what is the conversation that you have with your kids, with your husband, with your family and friends that also live in the West Bank around these so-called bad apples?
First of all, we don't hear about it as quickly as other people because it's not something people here focus on. Second, it's a given for everybody here that it's abhorrent and it doesn't reflect anyone. And that's a given to my children as well. There are lots and lots of Instagram and TikTok videos of like Black people in America walking over to a chassid and punching him in the face and banging him down to the ground. And like, nobody thinks that that means that all Black people hate Hasidim. Like, that's a ridiculous thing to say. It's a ridiculous conclusion to draw. And nobody expects the Black American community to come out on force and declare that that's not in my name and they don't reflect me. It's just a criminal acting like a criminal, right? And everybody takes it as a given. I think there are people here who've grown up on fear and resentment for the lack of equality and the lack of protection. And it's manifested itself in a way that's outside of the bounds of what we consider okay. And that's really, really sad and unfortunate. And to me, it's just a given. It's like ridiculous. Like we don't even think it's worthy of mention. It's this, like the analogy, it would be so ridiculous to extrapolate from that all Black people think that's okay in New York, that we just think it's so ridiculous that anyone would think that the rest of us would encourage such behavior. It's and we as a collective have made more public statements about how we don't identify with that and we don't think that it's okay than anyone has ever apologized to random attacks on Jewish people in the United States on behalf of a group. It doesn't happen. It's just a double standard.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to ask you about, speaking of settlers with guns, I want to ask you about the idea of so-called everyday citizens legally owning a gun in the West Bank, including yourself, from my understanding. Tell us about what it's like to carry a gun with you in your purse, I believe it was, as you showed me just before we hit record here. What are the conversations that you have with your kids about guns? What are the thoughts and feelings that you yourself have around being a gun carrying citizen in the West Bank? What can you share with us about those things?
A few things. First of all, I have a really great holster that's biking shorts that is great for people who wear skirts, but I had to get it from Texas because in Texas they take their holsters for women very, very seriously. I do talk to my kids very seriously about the gun, and I tell them that I actually really dislike having one. I dislike that we have to have one, that I wish that we didn't live in an environment where I felt that that was necessary. Sure. Politically speaking, I happen to be a fan of people having the right to bear arms. That's outside of living where I do in the context. I mean, in other words, I don't feel like it's my right as a citizen because I'm a settler, but rather that people should, within parameters and with regulations, be allowed to carry a gun. I can tell you that my training made me feel much better about having a gun, because the emphasis was on all the times you shouldn't and can't use it, how a civilian, right, should always try to make sure that there's somebody with training and in a position to handle a situation rather than me, and that I have a weapon that can kill a human being, and I need to take that extremely, extremely seriously, with far more of an emphasis on the precautions and the safeguards and the times not to use it than in anyone focusing on making me a good shot. And there's like nothing about the gun training place is the most like Rambo macho, but that's not the message and that's not the attitude. And my children know that it's not a toy and it's not cool and it's not a status thing and it's not fun. It's a machine that's used to kill people. And I never want to use it. And I never want to have to come close to use it. And I don't appreciate the fact that other people have put me in a position where I feel good about being a competent gun user. That is not the default of what I want for humanity. And that they understand that, and it's taken with it like a very serious responsibility. They also know that if my family's in danger and I'm the only person that can prevent something happening, I will use it without the slightest hesitation and no guilt at all whatsoever. If you force me to be prepared to defend my family, I resent the fact that you created that situation, but I will do it, and I will do it, and I will not apologize. It doesn't cause me to lose my humanity, my faith in humanity, and my desires for peace. But if you mess with me, then like that's your choice, and I would strongly suggest that you not do that. I was speaking to somebody today who employee of the United States, and discussing the fact that, you ask the increase of people getting guns. I don't think that that's changing our level of security in a significant level. I think psychologically it's empowering people who feel quite powerless. The people who are home and are not on the front lines and are not impacting things feel like they have the ability to protect their family. The attacks in the massacre on October 7th created a feeling of vulnerability in Israelis that I think was quite fresh and new on a completely different scale. And to address that feeling of vulnerability by empowering people is important. I am proud of the fact that that empowerment comes along with very serious gravitas of training, that this is not something to be taken lightly, and we're not cowboys and we're not vigilantes, and exactly the time and the place, most of which is to not use it at all. May that be true for a very long time. But I think it's a wise decision on the part of the government to empower people and make it easier for people to carry arms. The analogy I made is that sometimes in the United States, they declare a tax break. And day to day, it doesn't massively change the household income for a family over the course of the year. It's a statement on the part of the government that we understand that you're hurting and we want to do something to alleviate that more than anything else. And I think that the government made that gesture, and that was a good reading of the room.
I think that's tremendous context that you provided around guns and settlers. And I just want to personally thank you for that, because what you said now also changed my perceptions and my maybe preconceived notions about some of the things that I've heard. So I just, for me personally, want to thank you for that information and those insights. I want to shift now to the war itself, that, as you said, started on October 7th with a tremendous massacre by Palestinians infiltrating Israel, killing over 1,000 people, mostly Jews, but not only, kidnapping over 200 more from some 30 plus countries, of course, mainly Israelis, but certainly not only. Tell us, what you're seeing and feeling on a day-to-day basis since October 7th in the West Bank. What are the kind of conversations that are being had in your community, knowing that, the West Bank itself could become at one point or another front. It could also not become another front. It could sort of remain relatively quiet. What are some of the things that you guys are seeing and feeling since October 7th with regard to the attack and now Israel's response?
So it's a pretty heavy question. So one thing I want to explain in terms of context is that most of the people who live in my community itself identify as national religious, what we say dati rumi. And most, not everybody, but most of the kids who serve in the army from within Neve Daniel serve through the Hesder program, which means they choose to combine learning with army service. What that translates into is that they are limited in the jobs that they are given. On the one hand, the army has them for less time, which means jobs that require a lot of training, it's not a wise investment for them to train somebody who's going to be in a job for 2+ years rather than 3 years. So they limit those jobs. At the same time, they've learned that the soldiers who go in with a great sense of purpose, right, of religious fervor and spirit of Israeli unity, in addition to military training, make really great combat soldiers. So we have a disproportionate number of kids, boys and girls, currently in Gaza. It's insanely disproportionate, and it absolutely impacts the thread of fiber and resilience of this place. It's a small neighborhood, which means my friends' kids are my kids, and they are growing up much faster than they should have to. And we all, just the list of young kids that we are praying for is just really, really hard to fathom. That's not to mention the young fathers who live here and are in reserve duty. It is not a slice of a typical demographic makeup of the country. And we definitely feel that. So that's one piece of it. At the beginning, when there was an infiltration, I think we felt particularly vulnerable. The directives that we were given to keep the place on high guard made us just feel that way even more. And, to put our house in full lockdown every single night was scary. It was a scary change to make. I cannot speak for everybody here, but every day that goes by that the West Bank, that Judea and Samaria remain quiet and calm makes me more worried, not less. The quiet is unsettling. We definitely feel like there's a waiting and watching for the right opportunity, because we're not seeing a condemnation of Hamas. We are not seeing an effort to say, there was an opportunity to say, hey, we're not them. Hey, two-state, put us in power. That is not what we saw. We saw all the chips being put in with Hamas, at least in public statements. So we will not let our guard down. And so we are live in a heightened state of precaution for week after week after week is taking its toll. And we are living that way, and we are very protected, and there are lots of people on guard, and there's lots of safeguards, and they're being increased, and there are people watching all the time, both in family units and in neighborhood units and as a yishuv and as Gush Etzion, which is great. But it's hard on the functionality and the productivity and the resilience of a community to live that way on high alert all the time. I hope that it's sustainable. And again, it's deeply, deeply unfortunate, but I think that we do feel it. And today is a great example of how we have to stay on guard to protect Jerusalem. That's just a part of where we live. And the people I know here who are like waiting for their husband to come home and their son are completely for this war and wants Israel to finish the work that it needs to do. And when I said, I made a voluntary choice to live in a way where I gave up on the world's approval, most of the people here did. Meaning, by making the choices that we did, they don't really care if the world does not think that they're on the side of right, because they gave up on that a long time ago. So there isn't a lot of wringing one's hands and pulling out one's hair that like people don't get it and there's disapproval. They're like, yeah, that's why we live here and not there, because we know what's going on in the rest of the world. We're not naive. But
Rachel,
every one of my neighbors has a story. It's just, it's really hard to wrap your head around.
I want to corroborate what you just said. there's sort of this thought and feeling about, well, whatever, the Israeli settlers, the people in the settlements, yeah, they made that choice. But I don't live in the settlements. I don't live close to the settlements. I don't live in Jerusalem. I don't live close to Jerusalem. I live in Tel Aviv. And I feel the same way as you. I feel that nobody in the world cares about the entirety of Israel, whether you want to call it the 1967 lines, the 1970 what lines, and this, that, and the other, Tel Aviv, Haifa. No one cares. No one cares that there are 9 million people that are living in Israel, uh, predominantly Jews, being that it is a Jewish state, but not only Arabs, Muslims, Druze, Christians, secular folks, and no one just seems to care. And I think I would share in your message and say we don't really care that you don't care. We're gonna do what we're gonna have to do to, you know, protect ourselves against this existential threat. And whether you agree with us or not is frankly more of your problem than it is ours.
I
I
want to
do
insert some history, Josh, that
right.
the Palestinians, when they were in negotiations over a peace deal, did not insert the idea that development of the West Bank, have a Jewish presence in the West Bank, was an impediment to peace. The person who innovated that notion was Obama. President Obama added that this was a provocation to peace. Nobody is marching in the streets of London or in Massachusetts and saying, get out of the West Bank. They're not saying get out of Gaza because Israel is already out of Gaza. They're saying river to the sea. They don't see the moral distinction between where I live and you do. It's the weeds. They don't care. And I'm actually glad that that's come to light, because this was like this false notion that we knew was ridiculous. And now people are just being open about it. We don't want the West Bank
That's
back. We
right.
don't want the West Bank. We want everything.
Right. That's exactly right, and there's really no better way to say it. I want to also ask you. You mentioned the Palestinians. You mentioned that they've had multiple opportunities over this now 40 some odd day war to condone the so-called Palestinian terrorists, otherwise known as Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and even their own leader, who's in the 18th year of a 4-year term, the chairman of the Palestine Authority from the Fatah political faction of the Palestinians, Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, whatever you want to call him. I think his first statement after October 7th was Palestinians have a right to self-defense. Like, I'm pretty sure that's all he said. He never once condoned the attacks, the massacres, the kidnapping on October 7th. And to that point, I want to ask you, Rachel, you know, based on your lived experience, both in Jerusalem and different parts of Israel, and now in uh, the settlements, do you think it's possible, probable, plausible to actually achieve peace with the Palestinians based on what we know today?
I think the Palestinians have been built as a people. They did not start out as a people. They were different tribes, and they were built as a people on the narrative that our success is determined by no longer having a Jewish state exist. So to take that as the core of your national identity and translate that into sharing a loaf, we have seen has failed time and time and time and time and time and time again. I will always hold out hope that the Palestinians will hunger for peace and prosperity for their family more than martyrdom for national aspirations that involve the obliteration and annihilation of me and my people. I don't see the pathway to that right now, and that's disheartening. But I would like to believe that there are people who are silenced, who want that and are willing to do what Israel did, which was take less than what it thought was fair and less than it wanted and try to make the best out of a situation that wasn't the loaf that they felt they deserved, right? The half a loaf. I want people to have a state and a passport and a national identity and a democracy and a vote and a say and taxation with representation and a future and equality and an education that involves democracy and potential and flourishing and not oppression and misery. I don't think it's the Jewish job to give that to the Palestinians. No one's saying like, where are all the Arabs? Like all these Muslim countries won't take them in, won't get involved in the regulation of education, aren't offering a better way, aren't helping prop up a better leadership. Um, but I desperately believe that there are people who are from this area who are not Jewish, who have rights to live a peaceful, beautiful life where they feel that they have some say over their destiny and they're involved in the collective endeavor of building a better civilization for their kids. I wish I had a clear roadmap on like how we're going to get there. But I don't think that this is like an Israel problem or even an Israel-Gaza problem. I think it's like a humanity problem. And that every day the war is going by, it's getting clearer and clearer. You know, how many people are focused on how do we create that kind of flourishing and democracy for humans versus they should have a state and they shouldn't, and you know, hate and kill. And I think people are showing their colors.
And I would add to that that the idea that the term humanity does not have one definition, and I think what a lot of this boils down to, a lot of people will believe or have believed that this is the so-called Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think it's been very clear to me, especially during this war, this has not anything to do with Israel and Palestinians. This is very much Jewish versus anti-Semitic. This is very much on the Israeli side, predominantly live and let live, and on the Palestinian side, annihilate at all costs Jews everywhere in the world, starting with those that live in Israel. Um, and that all boils down to we just have different definitions of what humanity is and what human nature is. And that's okay, by the way. Like, I'm not trying to impose my definition of humanity on anyone else. But if you're trying to impose your definition on me by massacring and kidnapping my people, I know three personally. I know three of the 240 people that are still in Palestinian captivity, and so it's very much my people when I say my people. And if you're trying to impose that on me, then hell yeah, I'm going to fight you, and hell yeah, I'm going to protect my kids over worrying about your kids. And again, as you said, with when we were talking about guns, it's also very much the same here. I don't want to have to go in to Gaza and put our soldiers and our people and our families and our lives at stake to do the dirty work that the other side has refused to do, and as you said, their so-called Arab and Muslim partners have refused to do. But if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do. I want to ask you a question on that note, that this is very much a sort of Jewish versus anti-Semitic problem, and less an Israeli-Palestinian one. You mentioned the school system in the settlements being very good. We know that the school system, not just in Gaza but also in the Palestinian components of the West Bank, is very it's as what they would say in America, institutionalized racism. Well, we would call it institutionalized anti-Semitism. We know it starts from a very young age, the indoctrination of Jewish hate, of Jewish killing, teaching kids not just to glorify hate and killing against Jews, but the actual know-how of how to kidnap and kill as many Jews as possible. We know this is very much a part of Palestinian society and has been since at least the 1960s, if not before. My question for you on the Jewish side is there anything in your education system or in other parts of the Israeli education system that you're aware of that talks about hating, disposing of, displacing, killing Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, anything like that that comes to mind?
There's nothing in Jewish law. I mean, I let my kids get a religious education. There is nothing in Jewish law that is higher than the Sabbath and keeping the Sabbath, except life, the sanctity of life. My kids are taught we save lives, we love lives. We have a country that sent a group of people to save Turkish citizens from an earthquake and were kicked out. We're going to go into enemy territory just to save lives. Oh, you hate us that much? Fine, we'll leave. That's insane, right? We are taught to protect life. Having said that, and this is something I wish that more Jews learned. Jewish philosophy, the Jewish law is that we are supposed to be a light. We are supposed to be way ahead of the world in compassion. We are supposed to help the weak. We are supposed to not live by the laws of nature. We are supposed to help the underprivileged. We are supposed to do everything we can to be compassionate, including to the stranger. And we are also supposed to vanquish evil. And we are supposed to stand up and say, oh, you're misunderstood. Oh, you're having a tough time. Oh, you're disadvantaged. Here, I will give you everything to help you. You do not have an understanding of the difference between right and wrong. I am not supposed to make room for you. If you are of the dark side and you want to celebrate death and you think that there is a moral rationalization for beheading babies ever, under any circumstances, burning people alive because you're angry or upset and you think that's okay, I'm not supposed to leave any room for that at all. And that we are supposed to hold this dichotomy and understand that that's what's wanted of us and that we have to set an example. I think we're being forced into the position of setting a tone and setting a bar that we don't want, right? We want the world's approval. We don't want to have to like be different. And that we're being forced into that position, which is the mission that God gave us, is to set that example, which is so beyond the pale compassionate, right? And pursuing justice and giving charity is a commandment. Whatever you have, you're given more than you're supposed to have, so that you will habituate yourself to giving it to people who need, so that you will see need. You're supposed to be habituated to see weakness and see it as your problem, while at the same time vanquishing evil. And that's not a dichotomy that the world is comfortable living with.
Rachel, I from the bottom of my heart, I mean, this has been so enlightening. I'm sure not just for me, but everyone who is watching and has been watching. Thank you so, so much for being vulnerable, for being authentic with us, and of course, hoping for better days for Israel, for Jews, and for the world.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Josh, for the opportunity. I'm hoping we will give people a way to contact me. If anyone has follow-up questions for you and they want to ask me directly, I welcome it.